and welcome back to CRT's Cozy Corner, Shakespeare Edition. With Valentine's Day coming up, I thought we should probably explore one of Shakespeare's most well-known love stories, Romeo and Juliet. But keep in mind, it doesn't have a very happy ending. So, are we ready? Let's take a deep breath. Here we go. In Verona, a beautiful Italian city of flowers, sunshine, good food, and fine houses, lived two families who hated each other with a fury. All Montagues and all Capulets were bitter enemies and had been since anyone could remember. One day, Tybalt Capulet was strolling down the street when Benvolio Montague accidentally bumped into him. "This means death for you," cried Tybalt, drawing his sword. Instantly, a gang of Montagues shot out of the side streets ready to fight, and at the same time a gang of Capulets appeared from nowhere, daggers pointed at their enemies. The noise was deafening as the gangs fell upon each other. Screams, insults, and the clash of steel on steel brought the ruler of Verona, Prince Escalus, from his palace to see what had disturbed the peace of his beloved city. "They are at each other's throats again," he fumed. "This must stop." "Enough," he commanded. "Your rage explodes from your veins like purple fountains. Montagues and Capulets, this must stop. If there is any more fighting, the culprits will be punished by death. Now go home, everyone, at once." And they had to obey. Everyone went home, but Lord and Lady Montague lingered, along with their nephew Benvolio. Lady Montague was anxious about her son Romeo, who was still missing. "Where is my Romeo?" she asked Benvolio. "He wasn't at the riot," Benvolio assured her. "He's not a fighter, he's a dreamer. He's in love with Rosalind. He wants to be alone all the time, to think about her." "He's far too young for love," his mother laughed indulgently. But Benvolio was right, and later that evening, when Romeo whistled to Benvolio to coax him out of the house, he wasn't surprised to hear Romeo's plans. "The Capulets are giving a party tonight. Come with me, Benvolio. I might see Rosalind there. No one would know who we are. It's a masked ball. I dream of it," Romeo told him, brimming with the thrills of his new idea. "Dream on, you fool," Benvolio scoffed. "I feel something," Romeo whispered. "Something important that's hanging in the stars." "You really want to go?" Benvolio saw how eager Romeo was. "Then we will. We'll take our friend Mercutio, too." Juliet Capulet was excited. She'd never been considered old enough to attend a ball before. Her mother and her nurse, who had looked after her since she was a tiny baby, helped her get ready. They combed her long, shining hair, winding it with flowers and threaded ribbons around the waist of her dress. "My ladybird," said her nurse, "just think, your first ball, only 13. Well, do I remember the day I came here to look after you. The sweetest baby I ever did see." "Nearly 14, corrected Lady Capulet. "In time you thought about marriage, Juliet. There's a young man coming tonight, Count Paris, who's interested in you." "My lamb is wise, but too young to marry," interrupted the nurse. "I have not yet thought of it at all," said Juliet. "Think about it then now," ordered her mother. "Younger girls than you are already wives and mothers here in Verona. I was not much older than you are now when I gave birth to you. Come down and meet Paris. Try to like him." "I'll look at him," Juliet conceded. "I'll give him one glance," she thought to herself, "for the man I love is my choice alone." That night, Romeo, Benvolio, and Mercutio, all disguised in masks, went to the party at the Capulets' house. No one guessed they were Montagues. Lord Capulet was at his most benevolent, welcoming his guests, offering them wine, ordering the musicians to play. Romeo's eyes flitted around the room, lit by the flickering flames of torchlight. He saw a girl more beautiful than all of his dreams, more lovely than any girl he'd ever seen before. She was dancing so gracefully, with some gentleman or another. She caught his eye, and he felt his blood surge all over his body with desire and worship and warmth, and In that heart-stopping moment, he fell in love. "Who is she?" Romeo demanded. Benvolio and Mercutio shrugged. "No idea," said Mercutio. "Aren't you forgetting Rosalind?" asked Benvolio. "She's history," said Romeo, unable to take his eyes off of Juliet. "I did not know till now what true beauty is." Tybalt overheard. "That's a Montague," he roared. "I can tell by the way he speaks. An enemy, a villain, come to mock us. I'll kill him now." "Peace," soothed old Capulet. "I'm not having any killing at my feast. The boy is Romeo, and, to be fair, Verona speaks well of him." "Huh!" muttered Tybalt furiously, striding past Lord Capulet to gulp down a goblet of wine. Romeo, seeing Tybalt temporarily silenced, seized the moment. The beautiful girl had left her dancing partner, and he slipped through the crowds after her. "You have taken my breath away," he told her when he caught up. "I don't know who you are, but..." He held out his hand to her, palm upright, and the girl held out hers, so their two palms fit together. "I want to kiss you," he whispered. "And I you, too," she whispered back. They clasped each other's fingers, both wide-eyed. Both were equally spellbound, sharing the feelings of being swept away, as if they were the first and only people alive to enjoy it, as if "don't" meant "do," and "be careful" meant nothing at all. They couldn't let each other go. Until Juliet's nurse burst by and interrupted them. "Your mother wants to see you, lamb," she said, eyeing Romeo. "Who is her mother?" asked Romeo. "She is the lady of this house, of course," the nurse replied. Romeo froze. "So this girl is Juliet Capulet," confirmed the nurse, bustling Juliet away. "The daughter of my enemy," thought Romeo, turning away in despair. "I must leave this house at once." "Who is that man?" Juliet asked the nurse as they hurried along to her mother. "Romeo, a Montague, the son of your great enemy," nurse told her. "How cruel," Juliet whispered to herself. "My only love has sprung from my only hate." She couldn't endure the party anymore and felt so meaningless to her, so she excused herself as soon as she could and crept upstairs to lie on her bed and think of Romeo, his fingers interlinked with hers, the kiss hovering on his lips, the expression in his eyes. Romeo did not go home that night. Instead, he hid under the vines in the Capulet garden, unable to tear himself away. Juliet couldn't sleep either. She tossed and turned, and at last she went to her balcony to quicken her turbulent thoughts in the cool stillness of the night air. "What's that light?" breathed Romeo, seeing the glow from her window and creeping out. And there above him he saw his love. "Oh," he sighed, "it must be the east. There is Juliet, the sun." Juliet did not know how close he was, but her thoughts were so full of him that they spilled out of her lips, and she cried out, "Oh, Romeo, Romeo, why do you have to be Romeo, a Montague? Oh, Romeo, give up your name, be someone else, be my love, and I'll no longer be a Capulet. After all, what is a name? A rose would smell just as sweet if we called it a different name. The name Montague means nothing to me. Oh, Romeo, take off your name, just be yourself, and in return, take all of me." Romeo emerged from the undergrowth beneath her window, smiling as if he could never stop. "I am a man, not a name. Call me love, and I'll be yours." Juliet gasped. "If my family see you, they'll murder you." "I wouldn't care. My life is not worth living unless I am with you," Romeo declared. "Marry me, Juliet, tomorrow. Why should we wait a moment more?" Juliet's feelings soared as she looked down at Romeo. 1,000 times, yes, she replied, her mind reeling. But however would she escape the house to come and see him? "I'll send my nurse to meet you in the market square tomorrow morning, and she can tell me what you've planned." Voices inside the house called Juliet's name. Juliet turned to go, whispering, "Good night, good night." But unable to tear herself away, she turned back. "Parting is such sweet sorrow that I shall keep saying good night until tomorrow." She smiled ruefully. Finally, she slipped away into her bedroom. At first light, Romeo raced to the Friar Lawrence, a priest and a good friend he had known all his life. "Good heavens!" exclaimed Friar Lawrence. "How come you're here so early? You look as if you have not slept at all. What's the matter?" I'm in love, Romeo explained rapidly, with Juliet, daughter of my enemy. We want to be married today. Please help us. I know you are wise. The friar pondered the news. This was a match doomed to failure. Or was it? Your love may just be able to stop the hatred of Montague and Capulet for one another. And so be for the good of your families and all of Verona, he mused. Within a minute he had decided. I will help. Yes, I will marry you in secret this very afternoon. Thank you, breathed Romeo, and he ran to the market square where he was to meet Juliet's nurse. Tell her, he panted, this afternoon, 2:00 at Friar Lawrence's. Our wedding. The nurse looked carefully at the man her beloved nursling had fallen in love with. Handsome, long-limbed, eager, she thought approvingly, but she wanted to be sure of him. Can I trust you? She asked him. If you lead my Juliet into a fool's paradise, I'll never forgive you, for she is the sweetest lady. Yes, trust me, for I adore her, Romeo assured her sincerely. And tonight, when she must return home, bring a rope ladder to her balcony and hide it there so that I can climb up to her in secret. I'll remember, the nurse nodded, plucking a sweet-smelling sprig of leaves from a bush and sniffing it. Here's rosemary for remembrance. And Rosemary and Romeo both begin with an R. I won't forget. She put her posy in her pocket and hurried back to the Capulet house. What did Romeo say? Demanded Juliet, pouncing on her nurse the moment she returned. Oof, panted the nurse, sinking into the chair. I'm too old for all this running about. Tell me, urged Juliet. Speak, oh please, get on with it. At 2:00 this afternoon, you are to hurry to Friar Lawrence's cell. There your love will be waiting to make you his wife, the nurse said at last. Juliet hugged her until she gasped for breath. And if your parents want you while you are gone, I'll make an excuse for you, the nurse promised. Juliet nodded, her thoughts still on Romeo. How did he seem? She asked. He's as gentle as a lamb, kind, he looks honest. Not as rich as Paris, and your parents won't like it, but young blood knows what it wants. Oh, my little nursling, you can hide nothing from me. You're blushing, Juliet. Your cheeks have gone pink. That afternoon, Mercutio and Benvolio were strolling in the streets when they met Tybalt with a bunch of Capulets. Aha, growled Tybalt. Montagues, you came to our party uninvited, didn't you? Villains, I'd like a word with one of you. Just one word? Mercutio sneered. Double it. Make it a word and a blow. And here comes another of you villains, Tybalt continued, spotting Romeo hurrying along the road. Romeo had just come from Friar Lawrence, who had secretly carried out the marriage. He and Juliet were now husband and wife. Luckily, no one had seen them, and Juliet had gone home before her parents realized she had been out. I'm no villain, Romeo informed Tybalt. In fact, the name of Capulet is as dear to me as my own. Liar, hissed Tybalt, drawing his sword. Who are you calling a liar? Mercutio said furiously, pulling out his dagger. You rat catcher, you king of cats. Don't, cried Romeo. The prince has forbidden brawling in the streets. But no one listened. The clash of weapons echoed fatally in the cobbled streets. Death was swift and ruthless. In a moment, Mercutio lay still, and Tybalt's sword dripped with blood. Seeing his friend lying dead on the ground, all reason deserted Romeo. Red, hot anger flooded his mind, and he leapt forward and plunged his own sword into Tybalt's heart. Tybalt slumped to the ground, and Romeo's sword clattered from his hand. Numb and horrified, Romeo staggered away from the scene. The noise of the scuffle brought people rushing into the street, including the prince and Juliet's parents. There they stood, staring sadly at the two murdered men, their short lives wasted. Benvolio, the only man left, had to answer the prince's questions. Tybalt began it. Tybalt killed Mercutio. Romeo didn't want anyone to fight at all. He was trying to stop them, he explained. But then Romeo killed Tybalt? Romeo must die, snapped Lady Capulet. She began to cry. Poor Tybalt, he was my brother's child. Enough, said the prince. Hear my decision. I pronounce Romeo exiled. Never shall he show his face here in Verona again, on pain of death. Juliet buried herself in her bedroom, waiting for the slow hours of afternoon to turn into night, when Romeo had promised to come to her. She asked her nurse to leave her alone, so she was very surprised when she burst in, tears pouring down her cheeks. Tybalt, your cousin is dead, sobbed the nurse. Romeo, not dead too, Juliet gasped. Dead to you, or as good as dead. He is banished. The nurse closed her eyes as if to shut out the terrible violence of her news. Because he killed Tybalt, she whispered. Juliet couldn't believe her ears. Oh, please, no. Did Romeo's hand shed Tybalt's blood? It shows you can't trust any man, said the nurse. Romeo should be ashamed. I won't listen to you, Juliet burst out. Shame and Romeo have nothing to do with each other. Tybalt would have killed Romeo, and for that Romeo is banished. Oh, what shall I do? I've only been a wife for 3 hours. And she flung herself on her bed, sobs wrenching her whole body. Hush, don't cry, comforted her nurse. I know he's hiding in Friar Lawrence's cell. I'll bring him to you in secret. Quickly, sobbed Juliet. Where are my parents? They mustn't know. Downstairs, wailing over Tybalt. Do you want to go to them? Juliet shook her head. I'll stay here, she gulped, struggling to hold back her tears. Let them cry. I must keep my tears for when my Romeo has gone. Hurry, nurse. Bring him to me before we must part forever. Romeo was with Friar Lawrence, pacing up and down his cell, bitterly regretting the way he'd let himself be overcome by anger. When he saw Juliet's nurse, he fell on her like a child seeking comfort. Tell me how Juliet is. Does she hate me? I killed her cousin, her childhood playmate. She wants you, the nurse assured him. But I must leave her, Romeo sobbed. I have to go. I've been banished. You can't let yourself collapse into a heap, advised the friar. Be positive. Look at it this way. You're alive. Juliet's alive. You love each other. Go on from there. Soon you'll be able to ask the prince for pardon and announce your marriage to the world, and Montague and Capulet will be reconciled. All will be well. Romeo sighed. You're right. He left with the nurse, slinking unseen through the quiet back streets to the Capulet's garden. There he found the rope ladder the nurse had hidden in the vines and climbed up to Juliet's balcony and into her bedroom. Little did he, or Juliet, know that downstairs in the Capulet house, Juliet's parents were busy making plans that would destroy their fragile happiness. Poor Juliet is so unhappy about Tybalt, her mother was saying. She hasn't left her bedroom. Let's marry her quickly to Paris. That'll take her mind off grief. What day is it today? Monday, said Lord Capulet. Then we'll have the wedding day on Thursday. We'll leave her alone tonight and tell her tomorrow, Lady Capulet decided. Satisfied with their plan, they went to bed without the slightest suspicion that across the corridor, Romeo and Juliet were together. Morning came far too soon for Juliet. Are you going? It's not yet near day. That was a nightingale that sang, not a lark. Romeo smiled sadly and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Believe me, it was. Juliet insisted, her arms around his neck. Romeo couldn't bear to leave her, though he knew, as Juliet did, that to stay meant certain death for him. I'd rather stay than go. I'll welcome death, he began. No, love, live, cried Juliet, kissing him. As dawn lit the sky with a treacherous sun, Romeo climbed down from the balcony to leave his new wife and Verona forever. He just left in time. Lady Capulet busted into Juliet's bedroom like a tidal wave of information. I'm not well, mother, Juliet parried, turning away. This will cheer you up. You're to be married on Thursday to Count Paris, her mother declared. Oh, you'll be so happy. He's young, rich, handsome. What more could you ask for, you lucky girl? I can't, gasped Juliet. You're still grieving for Tybalt, I know, said her mother soothingly. But rest assured, we Capulets will find out where that villain Romeo is hiding, and will have him killed in revenge. Juliet shook with horror. Her father came in, eager to see how the conversation was going, but when he saw how Juliet had received the news, he was angry. You should be grateful to us, he snapped. Please, she begged, throwing herself on her knees. Don't do this to me. A daughter must do as her parents say, he shouted, and with that he and Lady Capulet marched out, slamming the door behind them. Juliet was left alone, feeling like an animal in a trap. How could she marry Paris when she was already married to Romeo? I need to see Friar Lawrence, she thought. He might be able to think of a way to save me. I'll tell my parents that before I can marry, I must make my confession. I know they'll believe me and will let me see him. The next day, Tuesday, Juliet ran to Friar Lawrence's cell. I've already heard you're to marry Paris on Thursday, he told her. I know how to solve your problem. Juliet held out her hands eagerly. Thank you, I'll do anything you say. Ask me to lurk in a pit of snakes, or chain me to roaring bears, or ask me to lie in a new grave hidden by a dead man. The friar laughed. Nothing quite so dramatic. Nevertheless, you will need courage, which I don't think you lack. He showed her a tiny glass bottle with dark green liquid inside. I have a potion here in this bottle, made of strong herbs. Swallow it tomorrow night, and there'll be no wedding for you on Thursday. This drug will make you sleep. Better than that, it will make you seem dead. You'll be cold, pale, and still, and your parents will take you to the family vault, where you'll be laid out on a marble tombstone. But don't worry. The drug will only last for 24 hours. Then you'll wake as refreshed as if you just had a good night's sleep. I'll get a message to Romeo. He and I will watch you wake, and then you can run away with him. How does that sound? Wonderful, said Juliet. She whispered to herself, Love, give me strength, because she was indeed frightened. What if the potion was really a poison? What if the friar regretted marrying them in secret and thought it was better to have Juliet out of the way? What if, shut in the stale air of the vault, she suffocated? But she could see no other way to help herself. She took the bottle, hid it in her pocket, and went back home. Tuesday passed, and Wednesday. That night, Lady Capulet kissed her fondly. Go to bed, you need your rest, for tomorrow you will be a bride, said Lady Capulet. Would you like your nurse to stay with you till you sleep? No, let me be alone, Juliet replied. The part of her longed to have them both with her to comfort her. What fate awaited her? God only knows when we shall meet again, she thought. But she was determined to grasp the only chance she had to be with her love, and so, after they left, she held the bottle to her lips and drank. Romeo, I'm coming. I drink to you. She gulped down the potion and sank back into her pillow. On Thursday morning, the Capulet house was abuzz with wedding preparations. Servants ran to the market to buy the best meats, fruits, dates, almonds, and marzipan. Wine was brought up from the cellar. The tables were laid and decorated with flowers. The cook was busy making a large cake. And Juliet's nurse went to rouse her, but could not wake her up. The friar's potion had done its work. This is the worst day of my life, screamed the nurse, racing downstairs. Juliet is dead! The household rushed to Juliet's bedside. She lay still and cold, her limbs stiff, her lips blue. My darling child, sobbed Lady Capulet, my only child. Lord Capulet put his arms around his wife. Her wedding flowers must decorate her coffin, he moaned. Death lies on her like a frost on a flower. Death is my son-in-law. Death is now my only heir. Romeo, meanwhile, had fled from Verona to Mantua. It was there that he heard from a stranger the news of Juliet's death. Wild with grief, he decided on a dark course of action. He persuaded a chemist to sell him a fatal dose of poison. I cannot live without her, he thought. Better to die by poison at her side. Juliet, I will lie with you tonight. And he began to make his way back to Verona. Friar Lawrence had written to Romeo telling him that Juliet was not really dead, but Romeo wasn't in Mantua when he received the letter. When Romeo failed to answer, Friar Lawrence realized to his horror that the message had never reached the young Montague. Oh dear, agonized Friar Lawrence. Juliet's due to wake in 3 hours. All right again. The boy has to know it's all a pretense so they can be together. But as the messenger made its way to Mantua, Romeo was already galloping on horseback to Verona. He was going to break into the Capulet family vault. Nothing, he swore, was going to stop his last terrible act. Nothing would come between him and his beloved Juliet. When he arrived, the door to the vault was wide open, and standing by the marble tomb on which Juliet lay, Romeo saw Paris. Solemnly, reverently, he was strewing her body with flowers. When he heard Romeo enter, Paris turned in fury. This is your fault, he roared. You murdered her cousin, and now she's died of grief. How dare you come here to this most holy place? You vile Montague, you must die. I must indeed, Romeo replied. Listen, Paris, I need to stay here alone. Go, please. If not, it will be the worse for you. Never, Paris said, drawing his sword. Romeo tried to keep his temper in check this time, unlike in his fatal encounter with Tybalt. He implored Paris, be gone, and just say a madman made you run away. You admit you're mad? Then why should I listen to your ravings? Sneered Paris, lunging at Romeo. Romeo drew his own sword, and they fought until Paris fell, mortally wounded. Summoning all of his strength, Paris uttered his last request. If you are merciful, lay me beside Juliet. Then he slumped to the floor and closed his eyes. Romeo stared at him in sorrow. Then he went to Juliet and gazed at her body. She looked as though she was only asleep. He drank in her beauty, her stillness, mourning all that might have been and the cruelty of fate that had killed their love. Slowly, he lay down beside her. Eyes, take your last look, he thought to himself. He opened the vial of poison and drank every last drop. Then he kissed Juliet one last time on the lips. And so, with a kiss, I die, he breathed. The poison flooded through him, turning his body cold, and he lay down beside Juliet and died. An hour passed before the door of the vault opened again. Friar Lawrence, true to his promise, had come to be with Juliet as she awoke. At once his eyes fell upon the unmistakable red spattered stains that told a hotly violent tale. Blood! Exclaimed the friar, deeply shocked. First he found Paris's body, and then he saw Romeo lifeless next to Juliet. Was it all my fault? He asked himself, clutching his chest in anguish. I went to help young love and end the hatred between their families, and now... Oh, Juliet awakes. Juliet's eyes fluttered open, and she smiled. I feel so comfortable seeing you, Friar Lawrence, she said, yawning and sitting up. I remember everything. Where's my Romeo? Friar Lawrence found it hard to say the words, but he had no choice. The truth lay starkly before them both. Dead. And Paris, too, he choked. Flee, Juliet, while you can. I'll find a place for you in a convent where no one will ask any questions. Quick. I dare not stay here any longer. It's not safe. Juliet gasped. Romeo and Paris? Love had played her false, and there was only one way to redeem it. But not in front of the friar. She had to be alone. No, I will stay here, she said, clutching the sides of the tomb until her knuckles turned white. Did she have the strength for what she wanted to do? She had to. Go, she shouted at the trembling, pale-faced friar. I will not leave this place. To her relief, Friar Lawrence stumbled out of the horrific vault as fast as he could. Now she could begin to piece together what had happened. A vial was clasped in Romeo's hand. Poison, then. Suicide. She'd follow him, of course. Death was the only answer, but the vial was empty. Oh, you drank it all and left no drop to help me, she thought. Perhaps if I kiss your lips, some poison might still be on them. She pressed her lips on his. They were still warm and waited for the end. It did not come. Death was not going to be so easy. The last choice awaited her. Yes, she whispered to herself. I think I do have the strength. She found Romeo's dagger, pulled it out, and plunged it deep into her side. Her body fell lifeless over his, and the rose of her blood slowly bloomed over them both. Sad news flitters fast through the storylines of life. Before very much longer, the vault was full of people. Romeo's parents, Juliet's parents, her nurse, Friar Lawrence, and the prince. They were all shocked and devastated by the sight of the two young people clasped together on the tomb, and of Paris lying in his blood on the floor, flowers and petals scattered wildly about them. Friar Lawrence explained how it had happened and begged forgiveness for his part in the tragedy. I know you are without question a holy man, said the prince. We are all punished by these deaths. Capulet, Montague, see what hate has done to you? I should have done more to try and stop it, and so should you. Oh, brother Montague, wept old Capulet, a broken man. Give me your hand. Willingly, replied old Montague, equally moved. The old sworn enemies finally clasped each other by their children's tomb, drawn together in grief. Outside, the sky was dark with clouds as if that day in Verona, the sun could not bear to shine. Whew. Maybe not the most uplifting story for Valentine's Day, but here we are. Oh, Shakespeare, he knew how to do his tragedies. Can't wait to see you again next week. Thanks so much. Bye.